Brothers and sisters, we stand at the precipice of something extraordinary in the heart of West Africa. The revolutionary currency plan emerging from Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger isn't just another policy discussion. It's the blueprint for the most significant challenge to neocolonial monetary control since independence. When Ibrahim Traoré declares, "More changes might still surprise you, and it's not just about currency. We will break all ties that keep us in slavery," he's not making empty promises. He's articulating a comprehensive strategy for monetary liberation that has French financial institutions trembling and Western media scrambling to downplay its revolutionary implications. This isn't just another African leader making grand speeches about sovereignty. This is revolutionary praxis being methodically planned and strategically implemented by visionary leadership that understands exactly what genuine independence requires in the 21st century. For too long, the Western media apparatus has conditioned us to view African monetary independence through their distorted lens of skepticism and paternalistic concern. They'll tell you these plans are economic recklessness, that these nations lack the sophistication to manage their own currencies, that they need the stabilizing hand of French monetary oversight. But let me ask you this fundamental question. When has any people ever achieved true liberation while allowing their former colonizers to control their means of exchange? The answer is never. And Traoré, that brilliant young leader who has electrified not just Burkina Faso, but the entire African continent, understands this truth with crystalline clarity. At 37, this son of Africa possesses the kind of strategic acumen that our ancestors would have recognized immediately. The wisdom of Sundiata Keita, combined with the revolutionary fervor of Patrice Lumumba. Now, before we dive deeper into this monetary revolution in the making, let me be absolutely clear about something. This channel stands unequivocally for African sovereignty, but we do not blindly support every leader who wraps themselves in Pan-African rhetoric. True African nationalism distinguishes between genuine servants of the people and opportunistic demagogues who exploit Pan-African sentiment to consolidate personal power. Traoré and his allies have demonstrated through concrete actions, not empty promises, their commitment to dismantling neocolonial structures while serving their people's interests. The discussions currently unfolding between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger represent the most serious challenge to the CFA franc system since its inception in 1945. When these three nations withdrew from ECOWAS in January 2024, they weren't just making a political statement, they were laying the groundwork for comprehensive economic transformation that begins with monetary sovereignty. The CFA franc system represents perhaps the most insidious form of modern financial colonialism ever devised. Imagine, if you will, 14 African nations in 2024 still required to deposit 50% of their foreign reserves in the French treasury. Imagine being forced to seek permission from Paris before making significant monetary policy decisions affecting your own people. This isn't sovereignty. This is economic servitude with a flag and a national anthem. When France established this monetary stranglehold in 1945, they designed it as a permanent mechanism of wealth extraction. The system ensures that African resources flow northward to European markets, while African economies remain perpetually dependent on manufactured goods from their former colonial masters. It's a brilliant system, if you're French. If you're African, it's a sophisticated form of continued exploitation. But something magnificent is happening in the Sahel region that should make every person of African descent, whether in Lagos or London, Accra or Atlanta, stand up and take notice. These young leaders aren't just talking about change. They're planning it with the kind of strategic precision that would make Sun Tzu himself nod with approval. The proposed monetary union between these three nations represents the first concrete step toward what economists call optimal currency area theory in practice. When economies share similar trade patterns, face comparable external shocks, and possess aligned political objectives, monetary integration can amplify their collective economic power exponentially. This isn't some untested experiment. This is sound economic science being applied to African realities. Consider the historical precedent. When the 13 American colonies decided to break free from British monetary control, they understood that political independence without economic independence remained illusory. The continental dollar, despite its initial challenges, represented a crucial assertion of sovereignty that enabled the nascent United States to chart its own economic destiny. Similarly, when the European Union created the euro, they recognized that monetary integration could serve as a powerful tool for political and economic coordination. Yet somehow, when African nations pursue identical strategies, Western commentators suddenly discover countless reasons why such approaches are destined for failure. This intellectual double standard reveals more about their unconscious biases than about African capabilities. The youth of West Africa, particularly those under 35 who constitute the majority of the population, understand these dynamics with remarkable sophistication. They've watched their parents' generation struggle under economic systems designed to perpetuate dependency. They've seen their natural resources exported at artificially low prices, while manufactured goods return at premium costs. They've witnessed brain drain as their most talented peers migrate to Europe and North America, not because they lack patriotism, but because neocolonial economic structures provide insufficient opportunities at home. These young Africans aren't seeking handouts or development aid. They're demanding the fundamental right to control their own economic destiny. When they look at Traoré and his revolutionary planning, they see someone who understands that true development comes from within, not from conditional loans tied to structural adjustment programs designed in Washington and Brussels. The regional implications of this proposed monetary revolution extend far beyond the borders of these three nations. Other West African countries watch these developments with considerable interest. Even Ghana, with its relatively sophisticated financial sector, recognizes the strategic value of monetary sovereignty. The ripple effects of successful implementation could transform monetary relationships across the entire continent. This isn't coincidental. The Sahel region possesses some of the world's most abundant mineral resources: gold, uranium, copper, phosphates, and increasingly important rare earth elements essential for renewable energy technologies. When these resources are extracted under neocolonial frameworks, the vast majority of profits flow to multinational corporations based in former colonial capitals. However, when these same resources are developed under sovereign monetary systems, the value-added benefits can be retained within African economies. The Western media's coverage of these developments reveals their fundamental discomfort with genuine African agency. They'll focus obsessively on security challenges while ignoring the economic dimensions that drive instability. They'll amplify every critic while marginalizing voices that support monetary independence. They'll invoke technical economic jargon to obscure the essentially political nature of monetary sovereignty. But let's examine the actual economic fundamentals. These three nations combined possess trade surpluses with major global partners outside the Eurozone. Their collective gold reserves exceed those of many developed nations. Their agricultural sectors, despite facing climate challenges, maintain productivity levels that could support food security across the broader Sahel region. Their young populations represent a demographic dividend that, properly harnessed, could drive decades of sustained economic growth. The question isn't whether these nations possess the economic fundamentals to support monetary independence. They clearly do. The question is whether they possess the political will to withstand the inevitable pressure campaigns that will emerge from Paris, Brussels, and Washington. And here, the leadership qualities of figures like Traoré become absolutely crucial. True leadership in the African context requires the ability to navigate between multiple competing interests while maintaining unwavering commitment to sovereign development. It requires the sophistication to engage with global markets while refusing to accept exploitative terms. It requires the courage to face down neocolonial pressure while building genuine partnerships based on mutual respect. The economic modeling for this proposed monetary union suggests significant potential benefits: increased intra-regional trade, reduced transaction costs, enhanced monetary policy autonomy, and improved capacity to respond to external economic shocks. These aren't theoretical advantages. They're practical benefits that would directly impact the daily lives of ordinary citizens. Moreover, the psychological dimensions of monetary sovereignty cannot be understated. When a people control their own currency, they control their own economic narrative. They decide how to balance inflation against employment, how to respond to commodity price fluctuations, how to structure their relationships with global financial markets. These decisions reflect values, priorities, and long-term strategic visions that may differ significantly from those imposed by external monetary authorities. The Pan-African implications of this planned development resonate far beyond West Africa. If these three nations successfully establish a sovereign monetary union, other African regions will inevitably examine similar possibilities. East Africa, with its existing customs union framework, possesses similar economic fundamentals. Southern Africa, despite its current challenges, maintains sophisticated financial infrastructure that could support monetary integration. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement provides the broader institutional framework within which such monetary innovations can flourish. When African nations trade with each other using African currencies, they retain value-added benefits within the continent rather than losing them to currency conversion costs and exchange rate manipulations. Critics will argue that small monetary unions lack the liquidity and stability of established international currencies. This criticism, while technically valid, ignores the successful examples of monetary sovereignty among nations with similar or smaller economic bases. Switzerland, with a population smaller than Burkina Faso, maintains one of the world's most respected currencies. Singapore, despite its tiny geographic size, operates a sophisticated monetary system that serves as a regional financial hub. The difference isn't economic capacity, it's political will and strategic vision. African leaders who genuinely serve their people's interests understand that monetary sovereignty represents a fundamental prerequisite for authentic development. Those who prefer to maintain comfortable relationships with neocolonial partners will always find reasons to delay such transitions. The generational dimension of this transformation cannot be overlooked. Young Africans who have grown up with internet connectivity, mobile banking, and digital commerce understand financial systems in ways that previous generations never could. They see Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies challenging traditional monetary hierarchies. They witness China's rise, demonstrating that alternative economic models can achieve spectacular success. They recognize that monetary sovereignty isn't just possible, it's inevitable. When these young Africans look at leaders like Traore planning these revolutionary changes, they see someone who speaks their language, who understands their aspirations, who refuses to accept artificial limitations imposed by external authorities. They see genuine representation, not the performative nationalism that characterizes many African politicians who talk about sovereignty while maintaining bank accounts in Geneva. The technical aspects of establishing a new monetary union require sophisticated planning and implementation. Currency design, monetary policy frameworks, banking regulations, international reserve management. These are complex challenges that demand serious expertise. However, Africa possesses this expertise in abundance. African economists, financiers, and policymakers have been developing these skills for decades. often while working within systems designed to limit their effectiveness. The planning phase currently underway demonstrates the seriousness of these leaders' commitment. They are not rushing into monetary independence without proper preparation. They are methodically building the institutional frameworks, technical infrastructure, and international partnerships necessary for successful implementation. This careful approach increases the likelihood of success while minimizing potential disruptions to ordinary citizens. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond economics. Monetary sovereignty represents soft power projection on a global scale. When African currencies gain international acceptance, African voices gain influence in global financial institutions. When African monetary unions demonstrate stability and growth, other developing regions take notice and begin exploring similar pathways. This isn't just about money. This is about dignity, respect, and the fundamental right of African peoples to determine their own economic destiny. It's about ensuring that African children grow up seeing African faces on African currency, learning about African economic achievements, understanding that their ancestors built sophisticated civilizations that traded across continents long before European colonial expansion. The Western financial establishment's response to these planned developments has been predictable. They question the technical competence of African monetary authorities. They highlight potential challenges while ignoring obvious benefits. They invoke stability concerns while conveniently forgetting their own roles in creating instability through exploitative financial arrangements. But here's what they cannot do. They cannot stop an idea whose time has come. This monetary sovereignty planning represents the natural evolution of political independence that began in the 1960s but remained incomplete due to economic dependency. When African nations control their own currencies, they control their own destinies in ways that no amount of foreign aid or debt relief can replicate. The success of this planned monetary union will depend largely on the quality of leadership and the strength of institutional frameworks. This is where the revolutionary potential of figures like Traore becomes most evident. They understand that genuine sovereignty requires not just breaking free from neocolonial structures, but building superior alternatives that serve African interests more effectively. The agricultural sector alone could drive the success of this proposed monetary union. These three nations together produce substantial quantities of cotton, gold, and food crops. When these commodities are traded using their own currencies, they would retain value-added benefits within their own economies. When they are forced to use foreign currencies, they lose substantial portions of their wealth to exchange rate fluctuations and transaction costs. The mining sector presents even more dramatic opportunities. All three nations possess significant gold reserves, and gold has served as a monetary standard throughout human history. A gold-backed African currency would possess inherent stability that fiat currencies from heavily indebted Western nations cannot match. This isn't just economic theory. This is practical monetary policy based on tangible assets. The youth employment implications are profound. Monetary sovereignty would enable counter-cyclical fiscal policies that prioritize job creation over debt service payments to foreign creditors. It would enable infrastructure investments that create long-term productive capacity rather than short-term consumption spikes. It would enable educational and healthcare investments that build human capital rather than dependency relationships. These young African leaders understand that development isn't just about GDP growth rates or foreign investment statistics. It's about building economies that serve African people's needs, that provide opportunities for African youth, that preserve African cultures while engaging with global markets on equal terms. The digital revolution provides unprecedented opportunities for monetary innovation. Mobile banking infrastructure in Africa often surpasses that of developed nations. Blockchain technologies enable new approaches to monetary policy and financial inclusion. Artificial intelligence applications can enhance regulatory oversight and fraud prevention. When African monetary unions embrace these technologies from positions of sovereignty rather than dependency, they can leapfrog traditional banking systems and create more efficient, more inclusive financial infrastructure than exists anywhere in the world. The cultural dimensions of this planned transformation resonate deeply with African values and traditions. Ubuntu philosophy, with its emphasis on collective prosperity and mutual support, aligns perfectly with monetary union approaches that prioritize regional integration over individual nation-state competition. This isn't Western-style capitalism or Eastern-style socialism. This is African economic philosophy adapted to contemporary realities. As we witness these historic plans unfolding, we must recognize that we're not just observing policy discussions. We're witnessing the blueprint for a new era in African economic history. Future historians will mark this planning phase as the beginning of the end of neocolonial monetary control in West Africa. The ripple effects will extend far beyond the Sahel region. Other African regions will study these models and adapt them to their own circumstances. African universities will develop new curricula in sovereign monetary policy. African youth will grow up with expanded conceptions of what's possible when their leaders possess genuine vision and authentic commitment to continental liberation. When Traore speaks about breaking the chains of economic slavery, he's not engaging in rhetorical flourishes. He's articulating a comprehensive strategy that begins with monetary sovereignty and extends to complete economic independence. The careful planning currently underway demonstrates that this isn't wishful thinking. This is strategic implementation of revolutionary change. The timeline for implementation remains flexible, but the commitment remains absolute. These leaders understand that premature action could provide ammunition to their critics, while prolonged delay could undermine popular support. They're seeking the optimal moment when technical preparations meet political opportunities and international circumstances align favorably. Brothers and sisters, this is our moment to witness history in the making. This is when we see African sovereignty transforming from aspiration to concrete planning to inevitable reality. When we support leaders like Traore and movements like this proposed monetary union, we're not just supporting policy changes. We're supporting the fundamental transformation of Africa's relationship with the global economy. Every like on this video, every subscription to this channel, every share with friends and family members represents a vote for African sovereignty, a commitment to continental liberation, a rejection of neocolonial narratives that seek to limit African possibilities. The Western media will never tell you these stories with the depth and perspective they deserve. They'll never celebrate African planning with the enthusiasm they reserve for European and American initiatives. They'll never acknowledge African wisdom with the respect they show for their own intellectual traditions. That's why independent African media voices become so crucial. That's why channels like this one represent more than entertainment or information. They represent resistance to narrative colonization, commitment to African perspectives, insistence on African agency in telling African stories. When you subscribe to this channel, you're joining a community of African consciousness, a network of continental patriots, a movement of people who believe that Africa's best days lie ahead, not behind. When you hit that notification bell, you ensure that you'll be among the first to receive analysis and commentary that puts African interests first, that celebrates African achievements, that refuses to accept artificial limitations on African possibilities. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand that African monetary sovereignty isn't just possible, it's being methodically planned by visionary leadership. Share it with young people who need to see that their continent is rising, that their leaders are capable of revolutionary planning, that their futures are brighter than neo-colonial propaganda suggests. Like this video to show the algorithm that African content matters, that African perspectives deserve amplification, that African voices deserve global audiences. Every engagement metric sends a signal that challenges Western narrative monopolies and creates space for authentic African storytelling. The revolution is being planned in real time, in our lifetime, with our support and engagement. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are showing the way. Now it's time for the rest of us to support their planning and build the Africa our ancestors dreamed of, the Africa our children deserve, the Africa that has always been possible once we possess the courage to claim our sovereignty and the wisdom to build our own systems. Subscribe now, engage consistently, and be part of the movement that's planning to transform African economic destiny, one video, one view, one conscious act of support at a time. The future of African sovereignty depends on voices like yours, actions like yours, commitment like yours. Don't just watch history unfold in the planning stages. Help support the vision that will create it.